Welcome to this week's Conversation Club in the third series. And today we have an auspicious day because not only do we have a new Prime Minister, not only are we experiencing a post office strike, and not only is our Queen in a parlous state, but we've got Tony Welch here. And Tony is somebody that I've known. He's currently, I think, is it VP Bids of Tyler's UK?
Bids and projects, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not saying currently with a sort of hidden threat there. I'm saying currently. I met Tony. It must be 20 years ago.
It was 2000 when we were doing
the
earned value training.
Yeah.
Project control system with modern BAE down at Filton.
That's right, and we thought we'd won. We thought we'd cracked earned value and that the whole world was going to use earned value at that point.
Yeah.
And I think at the time, Tony were you with a sort of risk specialist with BMT, weren't you?
With BMT.
And I think I just started limbering up on APM work and business and trying to get the SIG into shape and what have you. So I've known Tony for ages and ages and ages now, and he's moved through a variety of careers. Still here, still talking to me, so thank you for that, and still talking to us. He's had a really interesting career, and I suppose today we're talking to us about some of the biggest challenges he's encountered, and I suppose some advice on how we can get through that. Is there anything else you'd like me to add, Tony, or before you respond?
No, I don't think so, Steve. I'll
okay.
Take a few.
So very welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for the thank you for twisting my arm hard enough to get me to agree to do this. But actually, no, genuinely happy to be here and just running down the list. Quite fortuitously, I think, the participants today, because of recent meetings with Alan and David before the summer break, I think there's only Bob and Karen and Oleg that I haven't actually met before or recently. And if I've forgotten, apologies, but good to meet you again, or for the first time. So not often you join an external meeting where you know that percentage of the audience. All I was going to do, Steve, in terms of the title of this, what happens when your project's in trouble, and learning from difficult projects. We got together on Friday just to do how we're going to do this, what we're going to talk about. Well, because I work with a number of people on this call, or I have worked with them in the past or recently met them. For those that don't know me, and I better do 2 seconds on background because it might influence some of the discussion points when you're asking for my views on things and the personal aspects of it. So I had admit this. I'm going to talk mainly about my post-military career. I was 11 years in the Navy, and I've been 26 years in industry. As Steve's mentioned, I specialised in risk management to start with British Maritime Technology, but that within weeks that led me into scheduling and project controls because I couldn't do risk without schedule, and that involvement that we started to talk about there. Then I've had a mix of fairly senior program manager roles, project director roles, general management, MD type roles. I've been involved in or led sort of 5 large, complex, high-profile program recoveries in defence and aero, ISIT, transport, and it became the reputation for program recoveries has been a catalyst for really the moves between the companies that I've worked for since 1996. I've been with Thales since 2011. I joined the transport division in Thales in London to help solve their problems for the first couple of years. Was MD of one of their businesses for 3 years before I went to the Thales Group. So I was the VP Bids and Programs for the Thales Group for about 3.5 years before I was asked to come back and fix a troubled program here, which was of huge significance to the company and strategic importance to to the country, and finished there last summer, and have been doing the VP bids and programs role for Towers over the past year. And Nikki, who's on the call, and Andy Hood are part of my very own team. So it's nice that they've been able to join as well. So that was the intro, and I think that's where you were going to lead in with your first question. So I'll see if you remembered you're going to ask the right one, Steve.
I'm not actually. What am I going to ask you?
Well, it was interesting. On Friday, you asked me a question of so how difficult when you've been facing teams that have admitted that when the project is recognised as in difficulty, they've reached that awful moment. What's it like standing in front of them, explaining that? And I think my answer was, I stepped back and said, well, actually, that's not the difficult bit. Once you've got to that point, and you're actually standing talking to them about what we've got to do to get well. You're on the start of the more positive bit. That actually the hard bit has come in getting organisations to understand, and the stakeholders around it to agree there's a problem from the delivery from the project side itself and the business that's doing that, and selling and telling that bad news to the customers and stakeholders on the receiving end. So
is that where I said I likened it to the recovering alcoholic, and it's only when they kind of admit they've got a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And probably influenced with your email that then came up. Recognizing when your project's in difficulty, because that's the hardest bit, I think. And Nikki would remember that from prior to me coming back to the UK to address said problem and project, was getting the organisation to recognise and accept that it needed to stop, and then explaining to the customer and the prime contractor that we're going to have to stop for 3 months and put this right. We're going to keep critical activities going and do it. And then after that, I think when I look back at the 5 programs that you and I referred to in the discussion on Friday, there's some very, very common challenges in that recovery process, and kind of leadership that's needed.
Isn't there also a period where the problem is known, and yet you still have to there's still a period where you have to pretend that it's still okay? Like the what would you call it, the fake war, or what did they have, the phony war?
There's conspiracies of optimism.
Yeah.
There's emperors with no clothes, for sure. And I think if I look at my little list of here's the 5 I'm referring to, I can say on all of them there has always been that period of denial or filtering, and in some cases suppressing bad news because people just don't want to face up to it.
So again, a little flood of ideas, but why did they ask you in the first place? On the first one, do you remember?
Because of the type where you were involved, because of Type 45. My first big recovery, and a couple of other people on the call remember it because of similar company backgrounds. Astute and Nimrod MRA4, both at the same time, went to into a recovery program in parallel. In fact, I was asked, because of the Type 45 work that we were working on at the time, to work as the mods customer friend with the BAE team to on the MRA4 recovery. So it was trying to, they were pulling together a load of people that were for good practice to help reshape contracts and get it. So really it was the start of that Type 45 work which triggered it. Yeah. And then there was a common thread in my moves to different companies after that. There was a common thread that kept asking me to go and fix problems in a different company, and then in a different company. Yeah. So I'm not going to do any more, by the way, because you did ask me the other day, why do you accept it?
Yeah.
So for me, I followed opportunities, and there was. I've actually, I enjoy working with teams in those recovery scenarios. But I think I'm of the opinion now that there's only so many in you, depending on how big and complex they are, and I've reached my limit. Happy to help those doing it and share experience and guidance, but to pick up another one, I wouldn't do it now. Yeah.
Okay, well, give some advice to some other idiot who might then, in terms of, going back to what does getting the brief and day one walking in feel like then? How do you prepare for that?
Okay, I think and I think that where I said earlier, if I look back at those 5 programs, there have been common challenges in all of them. And when I say challenges, I think behaviours and actions and leadership things that have been crucial to the recovery. Yeah. The first one and all the 5, when I think about it, correlate back to my service time and the kind of the styles of leadership that you develop in a kind of military environment. First of all, understanding and acceptance of what the key root causes have been. So having clarity on that, so that you're really addressing the core problems. That's the first thing. Then simplifying what needs to be done, so everybody's very clear. And alignment to that. So alignment and comms. So once you've understood the root causes, very simple and clear messages on what needs to be done, by when and why, and then getting everybody aligned to that. So regular communications. You're moving fast. You can set some longer term priorities, but in the near to medium term, there will always be week to week priority changes. So the comms is absolutely clear. And then the key, absolute focus on people. There will typically, and if I look at the 5, I'm looking at my little list of 5, there has always been a people cost up to that point. So listening to the people and understanding what they've been saying, and often you find those people have been saying, we've been telling the management this problem for a long time, but nobody listened to us, or they haven't wanted to act on it, or there's been behavioural issues or leadership. There's been problems with the leadership, but you need to get into the listening and facilitative leadership space, helping them problem solve. And acting on what you're hearing, almost going out of your way to do that, so that, because that has in my experience, the quickest and most efficient, or that's the most expedient way of getting people on board. And if you can get them to despite X, Y, and Z, we are going to do this, or in the esprit de corps, where there's a desire that we're all in it together and we're going to crack it. And reward and in that sense, reward and recognise every success, even thank yous, walking around. That's back to the, I'd describe it as operational leadership. And you need enough of establishing that, not just in yourself, but in the team that are working for you. That style, that stance is fundamental to successful recovery. And then starting the 5th one is just do the basics well, build some towers of strength, just getting the basics done right. And then day by day, week by week, month by month, inch milestones are always needed. So you can express those successes on a weekly basis, so recognizing, because there's going to be problems, and you need to be balancing the oh my gods that inevitably emerge as you move forward. In normal project delivery, you get that, but you need something contextually. You always need something to balance that with, to keep the stakeholders engaged, to keep just building confidence. I'm not saying put rose-tinted specs on, but you need to adopt that positive stance keep people calm. This has gone wrong, but we've got this in hand. That's been delivered.
Mhm.
People know what the problem is. We're solving it. So that's you're
Mhm.
umbrellaing the teams in most circumstances. But that's what's required of the operational leadership. So that's the five things. And I think why I've probably got quite a buzz and enjoyed doing that stuff is, in my view, a lot of those leadership behaviours that are needed are rooted in the leadership style that I developed from a military perspective.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And could you sort of characterise what that is then?
Characterise it. I could probably contextually. Easiest way to do that would be, Nicky will relate to this as well from a military background perspective. Would be. I left school at 18, didn't go to university, went straight to Dartmouth College. Quickly found myself in leadership positions. I was in the Gulf in 87 when I was 21. By the time I was 24, I was found myself a second in command of a minesweeper, which is 38 people on a relatively small ship, but all of my department there. So as a first lieutenant, second in command, you basically run the ship. You have your heads of department, your engineering heads, your operations heads, and they're typically much older and bolder artificers, senior NCOs, warrant officers in some cases. They're not just going to keep doing stuff because you order them and tell them to do it. In a ship, that really is a team, and people do it because they want to do it. They want to be successful as a team, but you have to lead by example. And some people, quite a few people that I know that I joined up with, not everybody makes it or is successful. It's a very, what's the word it's a very critical environment. You're under the spotlight because everybody knows everybody. Your behaviours and everything are noted. Are you really, really part of the team? And it can be quite a brutal environment if you're not successful. So I learned a lot from that. I think that's influenced my leadership and people management approach all the way through my industry career.
So is that, I'm just thinking, do you go in and are you perceived in these situations as being in overall charge? And do you then have a responsibility to create some kind of succession? Are you in there with a view to handing it over as a running concern after you've been in? So, are you there kind of like a troubleshooter that fixes it, rebalances it, reconfigures it, and then leaves it? And a minor supplementary, going back to Monty Python days, really, about Tony's always right, rule 1, Tony's never wrong, rule 2, and rule 3, when Tony is wrong, rule 1 applies. Because presumably you're asked to give direction and vision, but how do you do that and guard against the fact that it shouldn't just be coming from you, the direction? How do you sort of build that, what would you call it, team working, team think?
So I think that leadership approach I've just described, and facilitative leadership, it's very much listening to people. So times you need to adapt. You've got to use different leadership styles to get things done. Sometimes being very directive is required, but be directive having listened to the teams and the people that influence decisions. Then sometimes you have to be directive, but most of the time it's giving the teams the support they need to make the decisions themselves. You're always faced with, oh, boss, the problem, or an oh my god. And it's how you react in those scenarios when your stomach's churning
Mm.
because you really didn't want to hear what you've just heard, and it's counter to what you've just told a senior stakeholder in a meeting the day before. And you've got to quickly get past for goodness sake, guys, why are you telling me this 2 weeks before we're due to deliver something? Why didn't you know about it sooner? And right, let's break the problem down. How do we mitigate that, or how do we recover the situation? You're absolutely relying on them because you can't be a specialist about everything technically. You need your problem solvers around you. You quickly learn who they are, and you need to build that into those people into your teams and get them on board, because that's the route to success. Yeah, having the credibility. And so you need to really get that first line leadership underneath you working in that frame of mind.
Yeah. And how, so almost like a working cabinet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in the last program, and Nikki was part of it for a year. You know, it was extremely intensive. Both management of the external stakeholders on a daily drumbeat meeting basis, because it was that important to the UK. And our own internal daily drumbeat meetings, because it was right, guys, what did you say you were going to do yesterday and this week? Where are you on it? What have you done, not done? What are you doing next? So you're making commitments to your peer group as well to get stuff done. So it's building that. That's a key part of building that esprit de corps. Depending on the program, the pace, will set the pace, size, complexity, environment, whatever else. If I look back across the 5 here, just to jog my memory on things we did, some were slower burn, some were more about establishing the monthly the monthly business drumbeat that didn't exist in the first place. Some were super tense because it was fast-paced delivery, like the last one I've just done. Others were going to take a year to turn the ship around because they had to finish one project and segue into the next part of that program, but in a much more efficient way. So they all bring their own individual challenges, but those 5 things I spoke about earlier never really, they're always the common challenge. It's the pace at which they have to be executed. That changes because of the environment. Yeah.
Did you find? I mean, what was the split between what I might sort of describe as technical deficiencies? Were these people competent that you were dealing with, and did you have to sort of rectify that? And or how much was behaviour and the sort of the general atmosphere?
80-20, and that's that's a good question, because whether it was intentional or not, but that's when I've done across tallies particularly, which I'll share in the presentation at evening, you look at the root causes, and we spent a lot of time looking across total life cycle from capture to bid into delivery. Why did programs get into problems in the first place? And then you're looking at understanding and acceptance of the key root causes. What are you doing in the recovery bit, or ideally in just getting on with the delivery bit? The challenge is technically process, tools, the engineering. It's not that when you categorize them, less than 20% fit into that bracket. 80% of them are organizational dynamics, behaviors, culture, and then they can be, so they're people related things, coupled with, if it's an external facing program, what's the environment around it? But that typically links back into the organizational dynamics bit, or behaviors on the interface with those stakeholders. So 80% is the soft stuff, less than 20% the technical.
And of the soft stuff, what do you think? What's the what could be characterised as, I don't know, some of the best behaviours and some of the worst ones? You know, I mean, above all, I think it's when people, for me, it's when people clam up. You know, you can stand in front of a room and think that you've got away with telling them or sharing a vision with them, but you walk out the room and you're not quite sure whether they bought it or not.
Yeah.
And whether you're just setting up I don't know, an assassination for later on.
Yeah, transparency.
Yeah.
And getting the dog on the table really is. I think people see through it as well. When you're in this kind of governance mode, looking at projects in review mode, you're not in. You learn to. You learn your indicators, don't you? Things where it's the sniff tests, and if you can do that, most times the customer or senior stakeholders that are looking at or on the receiving end of your deliveries, they or people in their organisations can smell when something's wrong as well. So you're kidding yourself. It's just how long you go on kidding yourself, and I think, but I think the kind of leadership skills we're talking about here, or the leadership behaviours that are needed for successful delivery, as well as recovery, the personal integrity bit comes into this as well. Yeah. In one organisation I was in before Talos, if somebody wanted to look on LinkedIn to see where it was, I was about to leave. I hadn't long joined the company. But what I presented to them as the problems and the fixes and what a realistic program would look like, unacceptable to the internal project. They wouldn't accept that. I got as close to, I got very close to just walking out and saying, well, you know, if you're not gonna listen to this, then I ain't gonna lie to the customer. So,
what was the reaction to that
then? We found a compromise in the way in which how the reality check should be presented to the customer.
Yeah.
But it certainly wasn't. Yeah, I could only let it go so far. In the end, the success on that program wasn't actual successful delivery because it was an undeliverable program. It was staying out of court. Everybody accepting that it was undeliverable, and everybody was culpable in what they'd set up in the first place.
Yeah.
And definitely, we touched on it on Friday because you'd asked a different question. Yeah. But in every one of those 5 examples, the company, the customers, all parties have been culpable in what was put in place in the first place was not realistic or undeliverable, depending on the circumstances.
But there was nobody there challenging them objectively as such.
Yeah, there was. When you look back at them and you do the root cause analysis in the cold light of day, you would have looked at it and said, if this had been reviewed by the right people, transversal knowledge sharing, using peers who've got similar experience and really listen to them. Yeah.
So that kind of, sorry,
you wouldn't cause the problems in the first place.
Well, so then I leap on to formal governance, and are there things therefore that you've done once you've been in and made your, I don't know, you've changed things. I'm not going to say fixed, but you've changed things so that it's going in the right direction. How do you make that stick? And are there things within formal governance that you would promote and suggest that can help that? Notwithstanding the fact that just because it's written down, that doesn't mean to say it's necessarily ever going to get done, but at least it's recorded as perhaps a signpost towards how things should be done. And then leaping back to, well, how do you actually really make sure that the behaviours or whatever it is that is required to take that in are are there, become available within the organisation to carry on the good work that you've done.
It doesn't always turn out like that, Steve, in my experience.
Mm.
Sometimes when you've done a recovery and it should have influenced how things are done, and in fact things are embedded in process, as a result things have been taken into process.
Yeah,
that's no guarantee that other projects in other areas, even though that's established, will just adopt, and that becomes the way of doing it. Examples, and there's people from companies on this call where that happened, but it has altered the DNA, the way things are done around here, the culture. And I've got examples from the 5 projects and the companies where it hasn't changed, and they revert to type. But my experience, I mentioned that transversal learning, peer review, some people on this call would recognise it as phase review, learning lessons and avoiding the problems. Central repositories of lessons learned, in my experience, don't work. Lots of effort and time put into it. They don't work. If you're doing rinse repeat type stuff, very similar projects regularly as a business, well, get things checklisted, get it into your approvals process, get it into process, so it's the way things are done, and you checklisting things before you commit contracts. But otherwise, your best views come from using people who've done similar things, gone through similar experiences, and really test how the deploy, how things are likely to turn out and the problems you're likely to face, and help you with that estimating and solutioneering before you actually move forward. And then stay with the program, stay with it through its life cycle, so that peers become friends to the project at critical points, or as they're approaching new phases. And Dave and others will remember, how BA Systems life cycle phase review approach it. That stuff works. And I'm trying to embed that in Thales as a way of working now, certainly for the big programs.
Yeah, Alan's got his hand up. We've got a question. Go on, Alan.
Yeah, one of the things that I've had experience of when projects have been going wrong is the business will then bring in a sort of a high level red team to do a review. But quite frankly, my own experience of red teams has been a little bit indifferent, because I think that there's politics that are being played by the people who are involved in the red team, almost as if, well, if we tell them it's really bad, we won't get invited in to do another red team review. But I just wondered if you had in those projects you've had to recover experience of red teams, how useful they've actually been, and whether there were any sort of common criteria that promoted a more successful red team review than one which perhaps wasn't overly useful.
I'm just thinking through, and the key ones that spring to mind. It's a mix, Alan, where they've been, depending on how they've been used. I've seen red team, well, we would have called them tiger teams in Thales, or a peer review. This is a problem with, there's a language thing. In terms of my attempts to get them adopted properly here, use them proactively. There's one of the key challenges we face is that people who face peer reviews in the past, it's because the program was already in difficulty, and they don't want people there stomping around on their patch, and they get defensive, and they say, well, yeah, we know what the problems are, we need to fix them. But equally, I've seen them work really well. The key is the kind of people that are put on the reviews. It's having the right kind of people, because the first 48 hours of that review will determine whether that review is going to be a good outcome or a bad outcome, and how constructive it will be. you've got to quickly get that team out of defensive mode and truly get them to understand that you're there. It's not an audit. You're not there just because it's gone wrong. It's to help to get better and make the commitments to help the program going forward. But still, the key is using them proactively in the first place. Yeah. Before the problem. It's to avoid the problems, not when there's a problem. But otherwise, I think when I keep saying I'm looking at my 5. Because it's prompting thoughts. I think in all of them that the red teams would have happened when they'd already admitted it's gone wrong, and the red team was helping them getting a comprehensive view of what of the issues that have led us to where we are today. Yeah. And then in 2 or 3 cases, the people in the red team have actually then become part of the team fixing it, actually part of the leadership, and then that's a good outcome. Yeah. Yes. But it can go completely the other way. On that program, the one I came back to fixing tallies, our internal audit team. So we've got an internal audit process like many large companies have, risk-based, taking a forward view of risk, what's in the pipeline, the kind of projects that have a higher risk of going wrong. In this case, the program was already going wrong, but they came in. So when internal audit are turning up, but it always gets people on their mettle anyway. But they're typically decent people. They've got good experience because they don't, that's one of the areas of the business where you need credible and competent and experienced people to go out and do those kind of field activities. And their findings. So I picked up their findings when I came in. We did have a deeper root cause analysis in a few areas, but what they'd found was absolutely right. But their findings, their outputs were coincident with the sort of red cards being shown, saying, right, you got to stop the program, you got to put it on a pause for 3 months. So does that answer your question or not?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does to some degree, but and I think what you're alluding to, really, that the real benefit to be gained is from that honest analysis up front of red team, and the key thing for me is that's actually all about listening to some people in your internal organisation who may otherwise be considered to be, the bearers of bad news. So and so's always negative and what have you, and it's actually exposing the views of those people to the people that really matter, which is key to getting that information on the table early enough to be able to take the corrective action in time.
You mentioned a very key word for me earlier, because in the worst examples I can think of, there's been a political element, and the selection of the people on the red team were chosen to reinforce what some higher up politics was suggesting. Yeah.
Yes. I've seen that happen as well. People come in and say, well, yes, it can be done, but if you put a probability on it, you have to throw double sixes for 12 months.
And I've seen it because they don't want it to continue. So politically,
No, thanks for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Shirley Thompson. Hello, Shirley.
Oh, hi there. Thanks for asking me about my hand. I wanted to do a little challenge. We seem to have got to questions, so I wanted to challenge a little bit this 80-20 idea, that it's soft skills, but also when you hire people, you actually hire people for their experience. In a conversation recently, we were talking about executive search for people. It didn't have very good education on what they were looking for. And the problem about doing projects right is somehow tied in with this measurement of how well people are doing these soft skills, and we don't seem to have any measure for them. I'm challenging this idea that it's 80-20, but actually we need people with experience of doing this. We don't measure how good a job they're doing.
In terms of the demonstrating those soft skills.
Yes.
the behavioural stuff. No, I agree. It's a good challenge, Shirley. Interestingly, one of the things I think it's working well actually. From a Thales perspective, we're like many companies at the moment. We're in the war for talent and trying to recruit to fill some significant gaps, for critical areas of the business. And we've spun up an accelerator process, which is regular, monthly, actually sometimes more than that, depending on which disciplines we're after. Twice monthly in some cases, assessment days, candidates coming in, but we've trained up a bunch of established people from the bid and project job family, the more senior ones and experienced, to support those assessment centres. But we've put in place a competency-based interview process, which is built around the leadership values we know we need, because to address that problem of we're addressing capability. We've got a capability improvement program running, which is largely around tool process stuff. That will fail if we don't improve the levels of leadership capacity and capability that we have in the business. So this, our own internal talent review process and recruitment work together to solve that, because if we don't solve that, we can do all the things you like on people, process, tools, or on the process and tool side, you won't get the difference. So that building that assessment process around those behaviours and values is probably 60% of that interview, combined with then a technical interview. They're two separate bits of the assessment day. So the CBI bit and then the technical bit. And I can tell you in the assessment, the wash-ups at the end of the day, where we're saying, right, we've seen 10 candidates, we're going to offer, we're deciding who we're going to make offers to. That the discussion and decisions are regularly hinge around, well, you know what, the skill, they weren't great on the technical bits here, but that's easily solved. What you can't fix quickly are the behavioural bits. So we're leaning very much on the behavioural stuff, not ignoring the technical stuff, but being very pragmatic about, okay, well, we can quickly fix that or fill that gap. We reckon they're worth getting on board. So now, in terms of measuring it going forward, that's got to be part of your internal talent review process. So what do I mean by that? That is, so we're looking at on a regular basis now, working through our junior, mid-seniority and senior grades in the company, getting our, so I'll chair that review with support from our HR team and the heads of bids and programs from each of the businesses, and we will do a sit-down, closed-door session and go through the people that are where we class them as developed potentials, global talents, key contributors, and people that need support or there's performance issues to address. And there is a focus on behaviours and values.
But what you're talking about is kind of slightly separate to project, so it's not actually necessarily yet being measured on an ongoing basis through a project.
On a project itself, we're in the throes of recognising that challenge. We've just say just in the past few months, we've started a process, project leadership reviews. So HR and the local project directors, program managers have and we're doing it with engineering actually, because if you think of we call it the Trinity, if you like, the project director, the design authority, the person who's saying the what is it you're going to do, and the solution engineering manager, the how are you going to do it. So the what and the how with the PM, there's a little triangle there that is key for anything from certainly a medium and larger programs. They're absolutely key. Their interactions and how they're going to work as a team and their development needs are absolutely key. So we've got a process running called Project Leadership Review. and that's proving to be well, the feedback from the project teams is very positive in terms of the conversations that they're having and how that feeds into the talent review process. So the needs recognised where we haven't got years of experience of doing that yet, Shirley, but the topic you raised there, I think, is a really important one.
Thank you for spending time on it. Great.
Thanks, Shirley. Before I ask Bob to ask his question, it's interesting that I think the point that was made that was this extends beyond projects, and it kind of slides into an area of interest of mine anyway, and I think yours, Tony, as well, and probably Shirley. That I'm not sure that I want a barrier around projects and project skills, because I think that those skills extend out into what I would again term life skills, and that those abilities are as good within a project environment as they are in a home environment, as they are in a social environment, as they are in the broader business context. And if those skills could but be translated up and down the organisation more fully, I think I'd rather have a whole load of people wandering around with the capability to adopt the role of project manager or project coordinator from wherever they sat in the organisation. A bit like, Holland in the old days. They call them Holland, Netherlands, as the total football idea that everybody can do it to a greater degree or other, and it's the way they interrelate and interact with each other, the right kinds of people with the right sorts of attitudes, which is the aim really of this kind of movement, and yes, by all means try and fix some of these things now, but with I suppose an eye on an even broader horizon and an even broader sort of outcome for it.
I think, Alan and David in particular, I know will relate to what I'm about to say. One of the problems we face, you put in decent project control systems on big programs, they're not all job bids and project job family that are actually leading everything. You have a big reliance on engineering companies that rely on bids and projects to deliver the business. I mean, statistically, 55% of our work package managers are actually engineers. So first of all, we need an engineering workforce that actually want to do that work package management, that PM bit as well. Now, a chartered engineer should be interested in time cost quality. To get their charterships, they talk about that when they sit their boards. But in many of the recoveries I've looked at, part of the problem has been getting the technical and the engineering guys to be in that space and do the job. We've started a delivery academy and it's part of. So if you've got a careers pipeline working, so you're bringing people in, apprentices and grads and what have you, you can start them on that journey. But we've got, if you look at the demographics of our workforce, we've got still a high proportion of older folk, older engineers who just, that's never really been a key part of what they do, or indeed what they wanted to do. So we've got to take some of them back a bit into that space and give them the base and just get. Yeah,
you got to teach old dogs new tricks, really. Yeah, maybe. Okay, Bob. One final question, I think, from you.
Okay, thanks, Tony. I have asked this question before. It's my main hobby horse, really. But every project manager has a boss, and usually they're on a board or they're senior people and presumably wiser than everybody else, or they wouldn't be the directors. The jobs that you've known that go wrong, and generally as a generic principle, how much of that do you think should be the responsibility of the project manager's boss?
A good deal. How could I quantify that? I'm sorry, I'm just glancing at my list, Bob, to give me some prompts on maybe putting some flesh on that. So I've got, when I look down my list, I can think of scenarios where the bosses could see something was going wrong for a long time but wouldn't admit it, and changing. How often do you see the project, the project director gets changed out? When I joined the company I was with before, Tallies, it was a program that was 18 months into an 18-month program, and they were on their 7th project director. Right? A couple had died, one had had a heart attack, 3 or 4 had been swapped out, but I was the 8th. I was number 8, and I actually stuck with, and it was with the 7th. The 7th stuck with me. We did it together in the end, because we needed internal and external facing. So I think often you'll see the PMs being the seen as the root cause, and they get changed out, and that's a really extreme example. But more often than not, it's because the bosses have been culpable for what they've contracted for in the first place, or indeed have seen that there are problems and just not being prepared to admit it. Many organisations, I think, have. In an organisation like Tallies, I think it's important that if people are going to be the bosses, that they've got real project delivery experience, because it puts them in a far safer place when they're reviewing the projects in their portfolios, so that they can ask the right questions and sniff out the right problems. I would love to have more MDs in our business that had that delivery experience and had more of that intuitive knowledge. The businesses that do best and get into less problems have bosses, in my experience, or that have got those scars on their back and have an intuitive knowledge of, I don't really, that what that person's just said to me in this review doesn't ring true. Maybe that's answered your question, but I think they have a large responsibility would be my answer. I'm not, and I don't know if that context I've provided helps with your regular question.
Well, it does. I wonder. I mean, I personally, from my own experience, directors are inclined, in my opinion, perhaps, to put up the drawbridge once they've got the big salary and the nice car, and actually aren't quite so interested. Another year or two will do them. Yeah. If you see what I mean. And so actually their enthusiasm for the theory of the subject and how it works in practice kind of wanes a bit once they're in the oak-lined walls of the boardroom.
Yeah. I'm not going to disagree with you. I probably, if we had time, I could expand. Yeah, give 1 or 2 examples of what I've seen. Do
you think directors should be trained as a separate role to project managers on how to look at the governance of a project rather than actually run it?
Actually, yes, and I think rather not just the bosses, but take whole boards, because how often when I joined the transport business in Tallies, that was something we did early on. Was we actually took the main board, the exec board, which I was sitting on, and then a couple of the sub boards that sit on the actual domain businesses, and we put them through project reviews for non-project people. So you're going into these reviews. What are the questions you've got? What should you be looking for? Do you understand the environment? Irrespective of the specifics of the project, the fundamentals of what's being presented? Because people were turning up to reviews. Why are you here? Well, because I'm the HR person for this part of the business. Right? Okay. What do you want to look at? What are you going to see? What value are you looking for? What interventions might add value here? So yeah, project training for non-project people, I think, is really important for execs, not just the director of the business, the actual director, the MD of the business.
Okay, thanks. I agree with that, by the way.
Well, a final supplementary and a final one, really, Tony, is how did you get to pitch that? I mean, was that your idea or was it somebody else's?
It was my idea, but it went down. Yeah, they really liked it because there was already. I mean, my gaffer at the time was ex-projects. He had a project background and he was VP for the business at the time.
Yeah.
And actually, I think in every case it was done for us and then some teams below us. It was a great team building event. It was well facilitated. It was we had somebody outside the business came in and did it for us from a different part of Tallis, from the training consultancy people. But it was a good team building event for an exec to do. Work through some case studies, work through some information. And it just facilitated people sharing their different levels of experience as well.
Yeah. So would that also add to your role when you're being pulled in to be the troubleshooter? Do you think it would be good to sort of consistently almost, train the board as well as part of your look-see at the big program that's going wrong? Because presumably the boards of these organisations or the senior management of these organisations were painfully aware that there was a huge crisis somewhere.
Some of them, depending on the project, the size of the project you're on, some of the board members were actually in charge of big chunks of the programme. So in which case, in those scenarios, in one or two of those scenarios, then the people were changed out completely. They were new. Because they didn't get the environment as such. So maybe that kind of training would have fixed that and prevented further occurrences. Typically people that turned up had project backgrounds. It
smacks a bit like people who get invited into the cabinet in our government. They get given roles of responsibility over which they have absolutely no experience or aptitude for whatsoever, but except for to agree with the Prime Minister. So, I know that sounds cynical, but it's kind of true, isn't it? You get people who are beyond their degree of competence given roles, but which anybody in their right mind, if they looked at sensibly, wouldn't give it to them unless they were suitably trained.
If you've seen the Times today, sorry, it's Bob. The cartoon is exactly that point.
Oh, is it? Right.
The entire cabinet are nodding dogs, with the Prime Minister sitting in the middle.
Yeah, and not lucky cats. No, they're the Chinese, aren't
they? Steve, there's a way of
go
on. Because I know Nikki here. Is there Nikki? If we were having a coffee tomorrow morning, is there?
I think Nikki's gone.
Is she?
She's scarpered.
Busy lady at the minute.
Yeah, go on.
Oh no, she's not. She's still on.
Oh, she?
No, she's not. Are you on, Nikki, or have you? No, she's gone off.
Doesn't look like it. No.
Yeah. I was just going to say to her, was there in any, because we've worked together for so long, was there anything in the answers she'd be saying, oh, you should have said such and such just to help, but she's not there.
Oh well, perhaps she's got faith and confidence with you, or she's left the sinking ship. One of the two. No, I think. Well, thank you, and thanks to Bob, Shirley, and Alan as well for their questions. I thought they brought out some very, very salient points, particularly, dare I say, that last lot, Bob. That was that's really interesting tack on it, because it is, they say leadership comes from the top, and making sure that the right things happen and in the right ways it has to be a core duty and responsibility of board members. And after all, they're in charge of it, and perhaps that would bring them back in off the golf course. I don't know. Anyway, so on that note, I shall conclude and look forward, Tony. Well, firstly, thank you very much, Tony, for coming along and sharing that. Because again, there are very few of you around who've got this sort of experience, I would suggest. And look forward to seeing you again at EVA 27 on the 12th and 13th of October, when you'll be taking us through progress to date with your work at Tyler's anyway.
Do a little bit of work on that presentation.
Yeah. So on that note, I shall conclude proceedings and say, well, we're into day 2 of a new government or whatever it is. Let's see what happens by the time we hit next week. And shall look forward to seeing you next Thursday at 4, and take care for the rest of the week, and get vaccinated if you can. Right. Goodbye.